We are joined by Nigel Evans. Nigel is Deputy Speaker of Britain's House of Commons. He was elected one of 3 deputies in 2010. He is a member of the Conservative Party and a member of Parliament representing the Ribble Valley. That's about 200 miles north of London. Nigel was previously Vice Chairman of Britain's Conservative Party. And welcome to Newsmax TV, Deputy Speaker Evans.
Great to be here. Thanks very much.
Well, before we talk about issues affecting Britain, Europe, and the world, can you give our viewers a little insight into your role as Deputy House Speaker? Here in the U.S., the Speaker of the House is elected by his peers and actually is the leader of the majority party in Congress. How does it work in Britain?
Elected, we have 1 Speaker and 3 deputies. And for the first time ever, the deputies were elected this time. They've always elected the Speaker of the House of Commons. And it works sort of like this, which is the Speaker of the House of Commons is a man called John Bercow. He was elected as a Conservative. And so there has to be 1 more Conservative as a Deputy Speaker and then 2 from the opposition side. So there are 2 Labour deputies. I'm the Conservative deputy. And John Bercow, ostensibly elected as a Conservative, now stands as an independent. Indeed, he stands in elections as the Speaker of the House of Commons. And so basically what happens is when the Speaker's not in the chair, one of the other 3 take over. In the old days, there just used to be the Speaker. And I always tell the joke that the Speaker's chair used to be a commode. And if he wanted to go to the toilet, basically a curtain would be drawn around him and things would happen. And eventually, after a while, the curtain would come back and a beaming Mr. Speaker would carry on with proceedings. Well, I think we've modernized somewhat now. And so maybe I'm in the chair for normally 2.5, 3 hours every day.
Well, recently the Governor of the Bank of England, Mervyn King, said that the British economy will go up and down in a zigzag pattern. Why do you believe the British economy is not coming back more strongly?
I think it's indicative of what's happening throughout the world and indeed what's happening in Europe specifically. I was in Greece about 6 months ago, and that seems to be a complete basket case, quite frankly, and we know that they're teetering on the brink of being kicked out of the euro. I was only there for 3 days, and the taxi drivers were on strike for 2 of those 3 days, therefore disrupting what I was doing and disrupting, no doubt, what's happening within Greece. I actually don't think many of the Greek people actually get the severity of the economic crisis which is facing them. And it's not just Greece, there's Portugal, there's Italy, there's Spain. I mean, there are a number of European countries where the economies are actually suffering far more badly than is happening in the United Kingdom. I don't think that we've hit the depths as some of those other countries have done, and therefore I suspect that our peaks won't be just like what is happening in Germany. But I think that what George Osborne, our Chancellor of the Exchequer, and David Cameron, our Prime Minister, wants is a steady improvement in the economy of the United Kingdom, paying off the huge deficit that had been built up over many years, and just getting our finances back into good shape.
Where do you see the Greek crisis heading?
Well, I'm fairly well pessimistic about the whole thing, having seen Greece close up. And I wouldn't be surprised, quite frankly, if Greece did come off the euro sooner rather than later. Whenever I speak to any politicians throughout the European Union and I say, well, part of the problem is Greece should never have gone on the euro, everybody agrees. So turning a blind eye and putting Greece onto the euro in the first place did Greece no favours whatsoever, and certainly hasn't done any favours for the rest of the European Union. But I think that we are coming towards decision time with Greece at the moment, and I don't think it's looking good at the moment.
Now, Britain has yet to join the euro. Do you think that with all of the problems now facing the eurozone, that it would ever be wise for Britain to join the euro currency?
I can't see Britain ever joining the euro. I mean, the scares that have happened recently probably reinforces the skepticism on behalf of the British public. For a start, there would have to be a referendum, if anything as seismic as Britain dropping the pound and going on to a different currency. And the British people, they would never vote to ditch the pound. I don't care what's going to happen. We're just grateful, quite frankly, that we never joined the euro 15 years ago. I mean, Tony Blair seemed to be rather keen. As soon as the circumstances were right, we were going to join the euro. Well, fortunately, the circumstances were never right, and I think that's one of the reasons why Britain's not suffering as much as so many other European Union countries at the moment. A one-size-fits-all currency for a number of countries that, quite frankly, aren't economically in tandem. It just simply doesn't work.
Now, some people, even George Soros, have raised the possibility that the EU might not survive this crisis. Do you agree with that?
I agree that there is a possibility it might not survive the crisis. I think there is general political will on behalf of Germany and France to make sure that some deal is done, that the whole thing doesn't break up. I mean, it would be a complete disaster for Chancellor Merkel and President Sarkozy if that was to happen. And of course, it would have seismic waves throughout not just the European Union, but the rest of the world as well. So I suspect that the stronger economies of Europe will make absolutely certain that their currency survives. But I mean, George Soros is a very clever man. He's predicted things that have come right before, and I think that clearly this is a huge crisis, the likes of which we've never seen in the European Union before. I mean, they were fairly well breaking new ground when they created the currency in the first place. But whether it will survive or not, time will tell. But I think that 2012 will be the important year as to whether it will survive or not.
Turning back to politics, when David Cameron's Conservative Party took power, joining with the Liberal Democratic Party, they quickly introduced reforms. Can you describe what those reforms were and how they have been working?
Yeah, I mean, it came as a huge surprise to all of us post the 2010 general election that there wasn't a clear, decisive result on behalf of either the Conservatives or the Labour Party. And so there had to be some sort of coalition. Well, we're not used to coalitions in the United Kingdom. Certainly in my political lifetime, I've never seen one. And then all of a sudden, you have the Conservatives with David Cameron and Nick Clegg leading the Liberal Democrats, politicians that fairly well have battled hard over many years, coming together in, I think, the best interests of the United Kingdom. I mean, Nick Clegg did battle hard for about 5 days before he decided that he was going to go with the Conservatives as opposed to the Labour Party. And so it's actually working. I mean, the coalition is working. A lot of people have said, do you think it's all going to break up before 2015? And my view is I suspect it will not. One of the radical reforms that has taken place is fixed-term parliaments. We never had fixed-term parliaments before. It was up to 5 years. Now, we all fairly well know the date of the next general election is going to be in 2015. And that's one of the reforms that has been brought about by the coalition. The other one that directly affects every member of Parliament is that in 2015 the number of MPs is being reduced from 650 down to 600. So 50 MPs are going to lose their jobs, whatever. And over the next 12 months you're going to see a lot of MPs going head to head to find out who's going to get the nominations for the seats for the next general election. So downsizing the size of government was something else that David Cameron and Nick Clegg both wanted to see happen, and that legislation has now passed.
London was racked by riots last year. Do you see that occurring again this year in London and perhaps in some other major European cities?
I didn't predict the riots last time, so I'm loath to say it's never going to happen again. It came as a bolt out of the blue, quite frankly, and whatever the discontent was that started it off, it soon degenerated into basically just theft and thuggery on behalf of a number of people. Fortunately, it was sort of brought under control after 2 to 3 days, and we've not seen a repeat of anything like that since. But I think we've got to be on our guard against that sort of thing. But whatever sparked it off, as I say, it degenerated into something completely different in the end, and people just stealing things. And I thought one of the good things about it was that swift justice was brought about to those who were apprehended and were convicted of stealing from stores or basically just wrecking stores. I mean, some people weren't even stealing anything, it was just out for violence or for damaging property. And there were some big prison sentences meted out to some people, and I think that sends shockwaves through those people who had been involved in the so-called riots. I believe that I thought it was the right message to send, and supported by the vast majority of the British public. They were delighted to see this justice being meted out pretty speedily.
Okay, what about the special relationship that exists between Great Britain and the US? Can you give us a little bit of insight into the relationship between the Cameron government and the Obama White House?
Yeah, well, Barack Obama came to visit the United Kingdom last year and got an immense reception. I mean, the whole Westminster Hall, which is a huge room, it's the largest room in the parliamentary estate, and it was packed. And I thought Barack Obama delivered a very serious and strong speech, and it went down incredibly well. And I don't think whether it's Barack Obama or whether it was Ronald Reagan or whoever, whether it's Republican or Democrat, the fact is the special relationship has existed for a long, long time. When I was growing up in Swansea, in Wales, in my 20s, I mean, I took a deep interest in the United States politics. The elections that are coming up now, it's on the TV all the time in the United Kingdom. You know, the primaries that are taking place, whether it's going to be Mitt Romney or somebody else who's going to take the Republican lead. I just think that there is a huge interest in what goes on in the United States. And we also know that there's a huge interest in the United States on what goes on in the United Kingdom as well. And it's very difficult to actually put it into words. The special relationship is something that almost exists without having to define it. The bonds between the United States of America and the United Kingdom have always been strong. I can't get over why there was ever a war of independence. I mean, we would have been just so good had we just carried on as we are. No, I'm only joking. But I mean, I just think that huge numbers of British people take holidays in the United Kingdom. The trade between the United Kingdom and America has always been immense. And I think that the politics, the interest, as we've been fighting side by side in Iraq and Afghanistan and in other parts of the world over the years, has shown the common bonds that are so strong and immense between the United States and the United Kingdom. And I'm proud, I'm delighted. I've got a little badge with the Union Jack and the United States, the stripes, the Stars and Stripes. I mean, it's there. The bonds are there. They're very strong. And it's difficult to actually say why they are so strong. But I think they're as strong now as they've ever been.
Let's turn to the situation in the Middle East. Israel right now is facing a very serious threat from Iran. Iran seems very intent on getting nuclear weapons, and some European nations have moved for sanctions against Iran. The Obama administration has indicated that Israel will strike Iran's nuclear facilities this spring. Do you see such a strike happening?
I think it's difficult to say whether any strike will happen and indeed whether Iran will move on to the production of nuclear weapons. But the fact is that nobody, no other country, and indeed countries within the Middle East don't want to see Iran arming. To have a rogue state like that having nuclear weapons at its disposal would just not be good for the stability of the world. It's pointless saying the stability of the Middle East because there's hardly any stability within the Middle East at the moment. But I think that we have to ensure and take every measure possible to absolutely make sure that Iran doesn't arm itself with nuclear weapons. But it's within the interests of the other Arab countries surrounding Iran that Iran does not have nuclear weapons either.
What is Britain's position vis-a-vis Iran and their nuclear weapons program?
Totally opposed. We are side by side with the United States of America in ensuring that Iran does not arm itself with nuclear weapons. We want to see a peaceful Iran, a stable Middle East as much as we possibly can. And if we have a state like Iran, which has already gone on the record and said that Israel should not even exist, to have nuclear weapons like that, I think will be hugely destabilizing in a region that is already suffering greatly.
Now, you've traveled extensively in the Middle East as a member of parliament. Can you give us some insight as to where you think the Arab Spring might be going? Will it generate more democracy or eventually more dictatorship?
Democracy is a huge concept, and I don't think there is one model that one can say is going to fit every country within the Middle East. And I have traveled quite extensively to countries like Egypt, where I met the son of President Mubarak, and everybody thought that he was going to be the one that was going to follow in his father's footsteps. Well, the people decided that wasn't going to be the case. And so what takes place now in Egypt is going to be very interesting, whether the Muslim Brotherhood takes over and whether they do lurch to one of the extremes, I think is incredibly worrying. Whereas we've seen democratic elections taking place in Tunisia, and that seems to be rather stable. We're now seeing democratic change in Libya, and I think that is all for the good as well. And we've seen reforms actually taking place voluntarily within countries like Bahrain, where the king wanted to see democratic reforms. That hasn't gone without its protests either, and sadly some deaths. It's difficult to say actually at what stage we are in the Arab Spring. It may be that we're just right at the very beginning and we've still got some way to go before there's huge change and transition in some of these countries. But at the end of the day, I think the people's will always win over. And we've talked about Iran earlier on, and we saw some huge protests on the streets of Tehran not so long ago. And whilst they were suppressed, you will not suppress the spirit of a people that want to see change within a country like Iran. And I think that my own view is that would be for the greater good if that was to exist in that country.
Deputy Speaker Evans, thank you so much for joining us here on Newsmax TV, and it's such an honor to have you here.
It's been my great pleasure, and we look forward to seeing the elections taking place in the United States this coming fall. And also, I hope that the interest of the American people will be alive and kicking as we celebrate not only the Olympics in London, but also, of course, Her Majesty celebrating 60 years on the throne. So we're going to see a lot of Americans coming to the streets of London this summer.
Well, do give Her Majesty our very best on behalf of all of us here at Newsmax.
I will. Thanks very much.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.